Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome everyone to the Movie Marquee. Today's showing is the ninth movie from director Quentin Tarantino, the 2019 release Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. With me, as always, is Ken.
Anybody order the fried sauerkraut?
And Ted.
What the hell are you looking at, you little ginger-haired fucker?
And I'm Eric. Remember, you're Rick fucking Dalton. We're using the expletives here in our movie lines here, going on the ninth movie by Mr. Tarantino. Hope we didn't offend anyone. If we did, we don't care. So
I care.
I know you do, and I apologize for all the. I was thinking of a Burt Reynolds line from Soaking to all the nice folk out there.
Interesting that you bring up Burt Reynolds because he was supposed to be in this movie.
Yes, he was. He was the Bruce Dern character.
And then he went out and died. Thank you, Burt Reynolds.
Bruce Dern didn't do too bad of a job, but I would have loved to see Burt Reynolds.
I think anybody could have laid in bed there and pretend they were blind.
Pretty much at this point, right? All right, Ted, tell us some particulars about this movie.
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, directed by Quentin Tarantino with a screenplay by Quentin Tarantino. It has a running time of 161 minutes with a release date of July 26th, 2019. It had a budget of $96 million and a box office gross of $374.6 million. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood stars Leonardo DiCaprio as Rick Dalton, Brad Pitt as Cliff Booth, Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, Emile Hirsch as Jay Sebring, Timothy Olyphant as James Stacy, Dakota Fanning as Squeaky, Bruce Dern as George Spahn, Mike Moe as Bruce Lee, Damian Lewis as Steve McQueen, Al Pacino as Marvin Schwartz, Damon Harriman as Charlie, and Kurt Russell as Randy Lloyd, and he is also the narrator.
Very cool. What a phenomenal cast, huh? And all those other
amazing
little names that we didn't mention that as you've seen this movie, you're going to, hey, it's that guy, it's that character.
Right.
All right, so what did the reviewers think of this one?
Well, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a critic score of 85%, which gives it a certified fresh rating. It has an audience score of 70%. We have Ben Sachs from the Chicago Reader. He stated that though Tarantino mixes fiction and historical fact cleverly and confidently, I'm not sure what he wanted to achieve with the mix this time, and I'm not sure if he knew either. 2 out of 4. Johnny Olesinki from the New York Post said, I think what Tarantino is going for is brazenly manipulating historical events to suit his style and turning a well-worn genre on its head. But in doing so, he's made an everything bagel of a movie. Part satire, part bear hug, part fictional bromance. Also 2 out of 4. And a big heavy hitter that we haven't talked a whole lot about in the past, Leonard Maltin, stated that Tarantino is an omnivore of popular culture. He has no need to prove this again. This movie reveals ambition but drowns in excess. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is just an elaborate time filler.
I'm surprised that Leonard Maltin is still alive.
Well, yep, he still is, and he's still reviewing movies.
Good for him.
On the positive side, we have Adam Graham from the Detroit News. He said, the Maverick director uses this tale of California dreams, both developing and dashed, to pay homage to the Hollywood of yore, play around with fact and fiction, and rewrite history the way he sees fit. B+. Kenneth Turan of the Los Angeles Times wrote, Once Upon a Time strikes a chord that is distinctly elegiac and unexpectedly emotional, especially coming from him. Peter Travers from Rolling Stone stated, Tarantino's all-star Fantasia links Hollywood and Manson-era violence into the best and most explosive cinema we've seen all year. You can feel Tarantino's mad love for movies in all their disreputable dazzle and subversive art in every shot. 4.5 out of 5. And finally, Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times said, in certain elements of tone and structure, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood has echoes of Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, but it is alive and electric with a beat all of its own. 4 out of 4.
That's cool. Even the bad reviews weren't terribly bad. No one gave it 0 out of 4.
No.
Not yet.
It was pretty. They were pretty fair and honest with the movie.
And on that note, Ken, why don't you tell us the plot of this one?
Well, I grabbed this plot from Rotten Tomatoes as well, so here we go. Actor Rick Dalton gained fame and fortune by starring in a 1950s television western, but is now struggling to find meaningful work in Hollywood that he doesn't recognize anymore. He spends most of his time drinking around with his friend Cliff Booth, his easygoing best friend and longtime stunt double. Rick also happens to live next door to Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate, a filmmaker and budding actress whose futures will forever be altered by the members of the Manson family.
Wow, that is brief. Man, you weren't kidding. Cool. Well, I'll kind of kick off when I first saw this movie, as I was discussing earlier, off mic, if you will. There have only been 2 movies that I have seen in the theater opening night and then bought the movie release the same day it was released. The first one being A Star is Born, the one from 2018, I believe. I lose track of time.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, I saw this one in the movie opening night. Ken, what about you?
This past Sunday was the first time
Sunday.
Yeah, Sunday. Eric gave me his digital code. I think I had it for a very long time, and I finally watched it this week a few times. Yes, that's the first time I ever saw it.
Awesome. All right. Ted, how about you?
I saw this in the movie theater as well. All of Quentin's stuff, ever since Pulp Fiction, I've made sure to go see in the movie theater. This was no different. Seeing a Quentin Tarantino movie in the theater is quintessential what movies are made for.
This is an interesting viewing segment because we have 2 of us that saw it in the movie. Did you see it opening night or opening weekend?
No, I didn't.
No? Okay. Saw it in the theater. And then we have Ken, who has just seen it for the first time recently. So kind of virgin eyes and ears this one. So I'm very, very curious to what his review will be at the end of this podcast. And we're going to kind of change things up a little bit on this one with the importance of the soundtrack in Quentin Tarantino movies, especially this one. We all agreed that we kick it right out of the gate here, talking about this incredible soundtrack, the songs affiliated with it that relate to this era in 1969, and the way Tarantino worked in real-life commercials into this movie, which I thought was just incredible. What were your thoughts on that, Ted?
It's a testament to detail, because Quentin actually found somebody who, back in 1969, had taken and recorded the radio. He put out a clarion call to people from who would have been around during 1969 and would have done something like that, and found somebody who recorded hours and hours of actual radio broadcasts from 1969, because the radio station no longer has any sort of records of what was being played or the commercials that were being run in 1969.
Yeah, they weren't recording stuff then. That was not the era.
I think it's amazing, and it adds so much texture to this movie because you get real life stuff. You get real life commercials for TV shows and real products, which is a little bit of a different take from Quentin, considering he doesn't necessarily like the product placement. It makes it feel more real. I can submerge myself more into the story that way, because it's like you're really like living it with these people. The music choices here are always top notch with Quentin. There's none of them that fall short here, except possibly the Jose Feliciano version of California Dreamin'. It's not my favorite version of that song.
I'm going to totally disagree with you on this, because this song is my favorite song, actually, on the soundtrack. Love
crazy.
This version.
Really?
I love this version.
No kidding. Wow.
I'm not saying it's better than the original, because the original's better.
But on this soundtrack, this is it for you.
On this soundtrack, this one is the one that popped out to me, because I knew of this song beforehand, but I hadn't listened to it enough, so this was almost like listening to it new. Whereas all these other songs I've heard hundreds of times, but this one, it just gave me something new to grab onto, and actually I've been playing it over and over this week.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about radio in this era is that Top 40 radio covered everything from pop, rock, R&B, throw in a little bit of country here and there. If it made it on the Top 40, it made it on the radio. You didn't have your segmented stations as you have today. So you got a sprinkling of just a little bit of everything on this, which is just really, really cool how it's all worked into the movie. All three of us can agree it is an incredible soundtrack.
It's great, but the only thing I have a problem with is Mrs. Robinson being back on here again. I like it where they put it, because they put it where he's at the stoplight and you have a Manson Ghost. Actually, I think they're all going across the street at that time and they're playing that song. You got the old man and the young girl, so it's like the reversal. So I like it where they play it, but Mrs. Robinson has just been overused so much in movies that I'm just kind of tired of it. And I love Simon and Garfunkel. This is one song that I just wish they would have put something else on.
So you're sick of hearing it in The Graduate, right? It's just too much play.
Yeah,
too
just
much play.
done with it. Yeah.
One thing that I didn't know, the radio in the 60s, even if it was like the top 40, like you said, Eric, it was still regional, because there's some of these songs that are played here were not major hits. What the stations would do, like they would pick certain songs. They were off the album, but they weren't the A or B sides. They were just random songs from the thing. And a particular section of America would push that particular song. So if you went from LA to Chicago, a different song could be pushed in Chicago than what was being pushed in LA. It's really kind of interesting. I had no idea about that until I was researching the stuff for this movie.
Yeah, and that's why you see like the Beatles having top 5.
1 to 5. Right. Yeah, it's incredible.
1 to 5. Yeah, it's because of those type of things where a B-side can be just as popular as the A-side.
All it takes is that one DJ to spin it, get that airplay, and it'll go 1969 viral.
This is my favorite soundtrack of Quentin Tarantino's.
Oh, hands down, me too.
I love this one. Hands down. I like Reservoir Dogs. I love Pulp Fiction, but for whatever reason, and maybe it's because of my love for the 60s music and the early 70s, this just speaks to me more, and this is my favorite by far.
Well, we're going to break this movie into 10 parts. We're going to talk about it amongst ourselves here, and Ken is going to kick us off with the beginning of this movie. So take it away, Ken.
At the beginning of the movie, we get to hear about Rick Dalton's TV show that he was on called Bounty Law. So we get to see some scenes from Bounty Law. We get to see like advertisement about Bounty Law. We see an interviewer interviewing Rick and Cliff, who is his stuntman. And they become friends over the last 2 seasons of Bounty Law. And then we get to then see 8 years later, after the show has been canceled, Rick is kind of a struggling actor, but he seems to be finding parts here, as they call it, the heavy, where he opposes somebody and gets the crap beat out of him or gets killed. And he meets up with an agent, Marvin Schwartz, who wants to get him into these spaghetti westerns. Rick doesn't think highly of these spaghetti westerns. He thinks they're crap. Marvin is basically telling him, by doing what he's doing now with these guest spots, that he's throwing his career down the toilet. 2 years, nobody's going to care about him because he's the bad guy all the time. And Rick is buying into this. He's there, of course, with his buddy Cliff because he drinks too much now. And he got his license revoked. He stutters all the time. But this is an opportunity. And he's going to have to think hard on this one. I love the first part of Bounty Law, just seeing good old Western feel to it. I like the establishment of them being friends. When they were doing the interview, I like the fact that they said the job of a stuntman is to carry his load. He's like, yeah, that's basically my job. You could see that they're friends right at the beginning, right there, and it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the film. This is a buddy picture, basically. As far as the meeting with Al Pacino, who plays the agent Marvin, I like the fact that they toned down Al Pacino and that he is only in here for a few minutes. You know, he still does his Al Pacino-ish.
But it's not Son of a Woman Al Pacino.
It's not
like,
it's not that post Son of a Woman Al Pacino.
Right.
It's very subdued for him.
But he does have that over-the-top performance, but it's in a good way here because he has to show Rick why it's important to him not to take these roles anymore. But my problem is, doesn't Rick have an agent? How does Rick get all these roles on these TV shows with no agent? Marvin basically should be talking to Rick's agent. I guess he doesn't have one. That just kind of like threw me off a little bit on how that all worked. But the dinner scene is cool. They walk out. Rick just starts sobbing. He cries a lot in this movie, and Cliff is there to kind of remind him that he's got this. It's a good start of the film. It's a good showing how much Cliff is got Rick's back. This relationship is the reason this film works.
Al Pacino's character, he almost has kind of that Robert Evans producer type of feel to him. He's more of like a larger than life type of character. This movie doesn't start off anything like the other three movies of Tarantino's. It's immediately right in your face. This starts off with the fun bounty law, almost sort of like commercials and stuff. It's really interesting. And then that interview is such old-timey NBC cheese. Next week, he's going to talk to characters from the Dick Van Dyke Show. It's an interesting way to start off the movie. I like how it establishes that Cliff and Rick are friends. And you're right, Ken, you get to see that he's kind of on the decline. That's where Marvin Schwartz is correct. It's everything in Hollywood is about perception. And if the audience is perceiving you as a guy who can just get beat up, that's what's going to happen to your career.
They talk about the movies that he does. You got the Tanner movie. And you got that, the 14th Fist, was it McCluskey?
McCluskey.
And he loves these films.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, the way that these films are portrayed, they're no better than the spaghetti westerns that he's turning down.
I know.
Yeah, exactly.
They're really, really bad. You got Leonardo DiCaprio with the eye patch.
Right.
And I'm thinking Tom Cruise.
Valkyrie,
was it Valkyrie?
yeah.
Hey, lift up the curtains so you can have the guy with the flamethrower. I mean, that is pretty funny. I have to give that credit. The flamethrower is hilarious.
He's already starring in movies, like you just said. They're double feature matinee type of a thing. We find out later that he gave up the last season of Bounty Law to try to become a movie actor, which was common for actors of that time to move from TV to movies. But he hasn't taken that giant leap to major motion pictures. He's still making those, I guess, what they would consider B movies.
These movies were being churned out a lot during the time of the 50s and the 60s. You got all these B movies that came out with bad special effects, bad scripts, bad acting. It was pure cheese.
Mm-hmm.
But people went to see it because, like you said, you're going to go to the drive-in, you're going to pay for the double feature, you're going to take your date, you're going to make out. You're going to have a movie in the background just in case, you're not making out with. Yeah. And that's what I like about Quentin Tarantino's films is how realistic he sets everything up. I think the movies might be even more of a C than a B movie, just based on the plot of these movies. But I love the flamethrower. Anytime you can bring a flamethrower to a movie, it just adds something special to it. I love the fact that later on we get to see it again. What about you, Eric?
It starts off just incredible, showing his heyday, where he was in Hollywood. And if I remember right, this is loosely based on Burt Reynolds, going from TV in the movies. Obviously, Burt had a little bit better of a career, but that's here nor there. I think Al Pacino was incredible in this, playing Marvin. This was your stereotypical schlock agent. The way he described Rick Dalton's career going downhill in detail, kind of breaking it out in segments, made perfect sense. And him watching these double features, he knew that this is the type of actor he needed to either revive the Italian Sergio Leone westerns or just make it continue. But he knew that he would, by those two movies, fit in perfectly. And you're right. I mean, I think he thought that he was making, like Academy Award winning movies here, not the schlock of the Italian movie cinema as he was talking about earlier. But I love the meeting. I love Pacino's character throughout this movie. He's only in it for 7-8 minutes total, but he gives an A+ performance all the way through on it.
You guys say Burt Reynolds, but this feels more like Clint Eastwood to me.
Sure.
We were talking about Rawhide from 59 to 65.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, then there's that spaghetti western period that he's making films over in Europe. But then he comes back and is a big star.
He's Clint Eastwood.
I mean, no, probably bigger star than Clint Eastwood, probably in the history of cinema. Based on everything he's done over the last 70 years now.
Directing, acting, I mean.
He is an actor's actor. Definitely part of the Hollywood elite.
So obviously this movie is really about Rick Dalton and Rick Dalton's career, and it's sprinkled with a little bit of Cliff Booth and a little bit of Manson, a little bit of Sharon Tate. And we can debate that, and I'm sure we will down the road, but that's kind of how I see it at this point. So as they're driving home, We see the Manson clan, the Manson family, if you will, is going through the dumpsters behind a restaurant, gathering food, finding some stuff that is good. And then they're carrying it home. And if I remember right, they are singing or chanting a song written by Charlie Manson.
Yes,
as
they
are walking in unison, almost cult-like, if you will. And
exactly cult-like.
Yeah. Well, it's creepy, man. It's well done. Dalton and Move are driving. They come up to him, the stoplight. He gives them the peace sign as they walk by. I think Cliff Booth is a little bit infatuated with the hippie culture, whereas Dalton could care less about him at all. He hates him because he sees his career changing with him.
He has more of a Frank Sinatra take on
Very much. And I like the banter that they're having in the car on the way back to Rick's house. Just really talking about the past, how everything is just going to shit and it's just horrible. And then Cliff brings up, hey, man, I'm not even a stuntman anymore. I'm just your gopher. I'm your driver. I'm just doing the stuff for you. I don't mind it. But, both of them are kind of going downhill a little bit. But Cliff always, no matter what happens, he is always keeping that positive go-to. You're Rick fucking Dalton, man. He's always lifting him up because you're right, Ken. Rick's a little bit of a crybaby here and there. He's a little emotional. We'll talk about that down the road. He's not the Clint Eastwood manly actor. He's not the outlaw Josie Wales that you'd expect to see in some of these westerns here. Cliff is definitely his rock, especially with Cliff in Italy with him for those 6-month period. He's done. We'll get into that.
They're driving down the road, and the car that they're using is Michael Madsen's car.
The Cadillac?
In Reservoir
Is
Dogs.
it? Very cool.
Car. And we also see Michael Madsen in,
yes, we
part of the episode of Bounty Law.
And
in that cheesy scene, right?
And we also get the guy who plays John Kreese from Cobra Kai and The Karate Kid in the Bounty Law section as well. One of the Manson girls is Harley Quinn Smith, which is Kevin Smith's daughter.
How about it?
Yeah, like you said, Eric, there's kind of a parallel story going on. There's essentially 3 stories, and it's how they all intertwine with each other. It's very Tarantino-esque. They're doing what they need to do to eat, and that was real. I mean, that's what they were known to do.
And I like how Rick has been there. He's been in his house 30 days, and this is the first time he has seen Sharon Tate. And Polanski is the hottest director in town, just coming off Rosemary's Baby. It doesn't get any hotter than that. That's even making Rick feel even worse. It's very interesting that he kind of puts that parallel in there. And then after that, Cliff goes home. And I love this scene where Cliff is just driving through L.A. in his Carmagia, rummaging through traffic, blasting the music. And how ironic, Dalton's living in the lap of luxury in Beverly Hills, and poor Cliff is living in a trailer park by the Van Nuys movie theater on their property. Like we were talking about earlier, he's going in there, he's got his dog. His dog is trained very well, which we find out later is a good thing that the dog is trained well. Mm-hmm. I love the dog food. I didn't catch this in the theater. Didn't catch it the 500 times I watched it. My wife caught this. We're on the couch and she pulls the cupboard up when he opens it up, and she looks at me and she goes, raccoon and rat flavor? And I go, what are you talking about? I had to pause it and go back, and I just started bawling in laughter. I'm like, that is awesome. Just the flavors of the dog food and just the plump as it just falls into the... I mean, it is a great...
On to more food,
and then he adds on more dry food, and he's eating his mac and cheese. He doesn't care. He pretty much just lives for Rick, and that's about it.
He's got a real positive... California.
Total positive vibe.
The feature presentation music that's coming through the drive-thru is the same music that Quentin uses in The Grindhouse. He uses that before every feature film that he plays in his movie theater in Austin, and the movie theater that he owns in Los Angeles too. That's pretty cool. So we see Rick, who is making whiskey sours. He has it's a reel-to-reel audio player, and he's running his lines for the TV show he's appearing on called Lancer. This is one of those things, too, you have to really pay attention. The way he reads the other people's lines, he was like, blah, 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 some Spanish, blah, blah, blah. And then he says his line. It's really kind of amusing. And When they pull up to his house, you see like this massive mural of Rick Dalton's face. How Quentin got that idea was he pulled up to Lee Van Cleef's old house, and Lee Van Cleef's house had a picture of Lee Van Cleef on the outside of his house. Just completely wild. But he's got pictures.
It kind of looks like a drugged out Jack Nicholson when you first see it.
It kind of does. It's kind of
does.
wild.
I'm like, why does he have Jack? Oh, it's him. Yeah.
And so you see Rick, he's chilling in his pool, drinking his whiskey sours. You can see he's feeling free and loose. Rick is preparing for this bit role, and he's not living the Hollywood life anymore. Then we get to see the other side of that, which we cut to Sharon and Roman leaving in their car out from the Cielo Drive house.
Are we sure that's not Austin Powers with her?
That's why Austin Powers dresses the way he does.
I know.
The car is cool, though. I love the car.
The car is awesome.
Is that an Aston Martin?
All the cars I think it is an Aston Martin. All the cars in this movie are really cool. And they take off, and they're going to a party, and it's like 11:30. And that's early for a Hollywood party. We find out that they're going to the Playboy Mansion. You have Rick, who's at home running lines for a bit part in a TV show, whereas Sharon and Roman, they're living the Hollywood lifestyle. And it's cool because Quentin puts up the Playboy Mansion, but he uses the Playboy font that's now completely ingrained in pop culture and everything. And we get our first look at the coolest man who's ever lived, which is Steve McQueen, played by Damian Lewis. And Sharon runs up to him and hugs him. And Michelle Phillips is there from the Mamas and the Papas. In the background, you have Deep Purple playing Hush. They actually did play Hush live at the Playboy Mansion back in 69. They're partying. They're having a good time. As an aside, you get the exposition from Steve McQueen. He's watching Sharon, who he obviously has major feelings for. He points out to the lady that's sitting with him that Jay Sebring was engaged to Sharon, but Sharon went to England to make a movie with Roman and cut off the engagement and married Roman. And Steve McQueen's just kind of lamenting the whole thing. And it ends up with his lady friend looking at him and say, well, she does have a type. Guys who look like 12-year-old boys that are very creative. And Steve McQueen just shakes his head and he goes, I never had a shot, man. Steve McQueen is the epitome of cool. Damian Lewis plays it off perfectly here. And to wrap up this section, you get to see the next morning Roman wakes up and he's got the dog out, he's got his coffee, and Sharon's sleeping in. And Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, one, she does kind of look like Sharon Tate.
Very much.
She is what I would consider a classic beauty. Her beauty is timeless. She could have been in any era of Hollywood. She is stunning, and I love the way she brings out how everybody has ever talked about Sharon Tate was this effervescent personality that she had. Everybody wanted to be around her, wanted to be her friend, and she was just a good person. And Margot Robbie, she plays it absolutely perfectly here.
She's a doll. I mean, I was talking to Ted offline on this, and her beauty is timeless. She has that look about her that's amazing. I know Margot and Quentin Tarantino reached out to Sharon Tate's sister, like her blessing on this. And I know Robbie talked to her and did her homework, and Sharon Tate's sister was very impressed with both of them, the way they were approaching it. And yeah, definitely received their blessing. And this is also the real Playboy Mansion. They were able to use the real Playboy Mansion here to film all this.
Took a little bit of negotiating to get that done because Hefner died, so the new owner had taken over.
Back to your point, though, kind of about talking to Sharon Tate's sister, most of the jewelry that Margot Robbie wears in the movie was Sharon Tate's jewelry. It's cool, but kind of
creepy a little bit at the same time. Yeah. I really love, we get to see Rick Dalton's rehearsing his lines. He doesn't have anybody to bounce off those lines to, so he's recording these lines and then he's going back and forth. Of course, I'm not an actor. I never thought that's how you learn your lines. You record the lines and then you go back and forth. It's just brilliant. And I don't know if that's truly how actors really do it. I would assume so because Quentin Tarantino would know.
Some do, I'm sure. It's really cool. So I love the dynamic here where we go from Cliff in Van Nuys living in the trailer, to the next level, which is Rick, who's kind of in decline of his Hollywood time, and then to the star-studded Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski going to the
Well, they're the
Playboy
up and
Mansion.
comers.
Yeah,
They're the new Hollywood. They're the new Hollywood.
Had just had hit Rosemary's Baby, and then they met together on the Fearless Vampire Killers, which is a personal favorite of mine. I really enjoyed that film. I always thought it was kind of interesting that when we were talking about Jay Sebring, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe was a hairdresser.
Yes.
I just think it's really interesting that Roman Polanski had that much confidence in himself that he let an ex-fiance not only be friends with her, but to live in their house at times when he's gone.
I'm going to say it. Are we questioning the sexuality here for the hairdresser?
No. According to everybody, and the way that Damian Lewis's Steve McQueen points it out is exactly right. He was laying in
the wings.
Laying in the wings.
Anything to stay in
Sharon's life. Also, too, Jay Sebring was friends with all of their friends, too. So it was inevitable that he was going to be staying around. He did Steve McQueen's hair. He did hair for some of the biggest stars in Hollywood on their movies. Yeah, but he stayed remarkably close to Sharon Tate still. It almost seems like it's a setup.
Roman has never lacked in confidence. I'm not going to say arrogance. That'd be a little bit too far. It would be remiss in saying that he would have ever felt challenged by a Jay Sebring.
Jay Sebring was also married before he met Sharon Tate. So he was married. Right. It was to a model as well. So he definitely had his own confidence.
Very much. Yeah. Let's continue with this one here. Our good old pal Cliff goes back to Rick's house, pick him up. And of course, this is my favorite line. Remember, you're Rick fucking Dalton. Drops him off on set there. And on the set, Rick meets the director that wants to kind of spice it up a little bit, make him a little bit more hipper, makes a David Crosby type of cowboy versus the prior cowboy look. Well, obviously, Rick is hungover. You know, he's got his face in a bowl of ice. He's drinking, he's smoking. Of course, that's all these people are doing is drinking and smoking. It's Mad Men all over again. So he's kind of a little out of it. He's willing to go, with everything to kind of get him on board. He does the makeup, the hair, and he walks out. And of course, before he leaves, I guess it was a storm. His TV antenna blows down on his house. So he's like, Cliff, do me a favor, fix the TV antenna. So Cliff goes back to the house, gets his tools, gets on the roof. I like how he's got the beer and the tool belt there. He's fixing the antenna. And then you kind of hear a little bit of music in the background. I think Sharon's jamming some Paul Revere albums or something. You got that flashback. When he dropped him off, he kind of told him, why he couldn't be on the set with him. And this is the reason why. So going back in time, we have a little flashback on the set of the Green Hornet, which Rick Dalton is in. He goes there and he asks for a favor while he's in his trailer to see if we can get Cliff as a stunt double. Hit him with a Lincoln, set him on fire, do whatever. I love that line. He gets him set up, and then we find out a little bit of Cliff's backstory. He's not well liked in the industry, probably not because he's a bad stuntman, but allegedly Cliff killed his wife while on a boat. And I love the setup. The scene is perfect. Cliff, calm as can be, got his beer, sitting on the boat with his full scuba outfit, a spear gun in his hand, and his wife is just sitting here, just berating him, berating the boat, calling him a loser, and then gets out of her chair and wants to pick a fight with him. She's like, I want to fight with you. Walks up to him, and he's got his gun. He's got his finger on the trigger of the spear gun and the beer in the hand, and then he goes away. It is beautiful. Poll, did he kill his wife? Yes.
Yeah.
All right, we're all in agreement there.
And he maybe accidentally, but
okay, he accidentally, yes, I'm sure.
Just like John Travolta accidentally killed Marvin in the backseat of the car in Pulp Fiction.
That's right. Accidents happen.
Just like Robert Wagner killed Natalie Wood.
But William Shatner's wife drowned in the pool accidentally.
Oh,
I said it. That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
She did say because when she was ranting, I thought she was like on the phone, and I realized, hey, this is 1969.
This 1969, there's no phone.
She's just talking and yelling at him, but she's drunk off her ass. Just ranting. It's awesome. Yeah. And I love how they just flip away from the scene. You're like, oh, yeah, he shot her.
I wish there was kind of a little bit more to that. I mean,
no, it's perfect.
It is perfect. It's golden. and
I don't know if
it's
it's
quick
perfect.
and it's succinct. So you want like the backstory of how they got to that point?
I want to know how he got away with it. Wasn't
Dumped her into the
convicted.
ocean.
Body
It's
disappeared, man.
1916.
Hey, he's a war hero.
So you know that for a fact they dumped her in the ocean.
No,
We don't know.
What else
So we
would he have
don't
done
know
with her?
how he got away with murder. All we know is
he's sleeping
They-
with the fishies.
they later on say he's the guy who killed his wife and got away with it.
How do you
Doesn't
think
matter.
he got away with it?
It's irrelevant. It doesn't
It doesn't-
matter.
When you don't have a witness in your
Can I get a
fingers
witness?
on the trigger and she's dead,
All he has to do is say that she was drunk. That he
and
has
she leaned into the harpoon. I mean,
they'll never
We
have.
don't know
there's
these
never going to be a
facts.
body.
I want the facts.
You're getting this memory from Cliff's point of view,
Right. It's a good
And
point,
that's-
Ted. It's one-sided.
and the way it's cut is just perfect because
Mhm.
you don't really know, but you know. Quentin does the exact right thing. It's boom, boom, quick, and it's off.
Because it kind of limited to me how much I can embrace this character. How can you embrace a murderer? How can you embrace
Allegedly.
somebody you have a thought that maybe this was done accidentally? Because throughout the rest of the film, he's just this caring soul. He cares about Rick way too much. He goes out of his way to check
Well,
on
he's-
George.
He
That's
was
the
drinking
thing.
on the boat as well.
Right.
It's conceivable they were both drunk.
Oh, they were.
I mean,
I'm sure they
it's-
were. But there's no other facts. We can't prove or
I think
disprove
the reason
anything.
I think the reason both of you saying that is because you want to have your perfect bromance.
Bromance.
You know, bromance.
Me and
Bromance
Ted?
between Cliff. No,
Oh.
not you and Ted. I mean, if guys are not telling me something, that's between you two.
I-
But no, I'm talking about between Rick and Cliff. If it makes it harder for you to accept a relationship if he's a really,
It doesn't.
truly a murderer,
Everyone's
She's
got
an ass.
secrets.
I just don't understand why
She's an
you guys.
asshole.
This movie's 2 hours and 40 minutes long. I think there's somewhere in that 2 minutes and 40 minutes you could have stuck in here why he got away with it. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, these 5-minute car rides, these long delays in between from scene to scene, and you're telling me that I can't have a little bit more of this? I think that's ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. But we don't get it. I'm not arguing that fact. I'd like a little bit more backstory on it, but I'm okay with where it is.
This is
I'm
the
okay
last
with
thing
the
I
scene.
want to argue about.
I know. We're going to keep rolling. We all have our favorite scenes in the movie. Obviously, that scene is not Ken's favorite, nor is it my favorite. But we're going to talk about my favorite, and this is the fight scene with Cliff and Bruce Lee. Yes, I know it is based on no fact, but I love the scene. I love how Bruce Lee is talking himself up. He's talking about boxers, Cassius Clay, and I love Cliff's sarcastic attitude where he just baits him and okay, let's have a fight. 2 out of 3 on the butt, right? First time he kicks him down. Probably intentional to let him get kicked, I think. He's like, nice shot, Kato. Let's try that again. And I love LOVE, apostrophe, when he picks his ass up and throws him in the side of that Lincoln. I love that scene. I don't know why. And then they have their little karate fight. And this fight, with the which we all know is not typical Bruce Lee. Little research on it. It was typical of the Green Hornet TV series. So that's kind of a small little fact if there is anything about this. And then when Janet walks out and she just goes on her tirade. Oh, I love the accent. I love Janet's voice too, man. I don't know what it is, but that voice just does it for me. And she just goes into him, and then Bruce is trying to defend himself. He's like, technically, he didn't really throw me on the ground. And it's without a doubt my favorite scene.
It's awesome. This is one of the scenes that everybody got their knickers in a bunch over, say that Bruce Lee was never like this and blah, blah, blah. Well, one, Bruce Lee's in front of a bunch of guys who are all tough guys. Most of them are probably stunt guys. And so he's building himself up. He's doing some puffery and puffing out his chest. I'm super kung fu guy.
And again, we're also getting this from Cliff's point of view.
It's not like Quentin pulled this out of the air, this whole Cassius Clay thing. Bruce Lee's widows talked that he had done something very similar to this. So it's not that big of a stretch. Bruce Lee's just being braggadocio to a bunch of other guys. And Cliff calls him out on it. It's just
and
the way
the
it's
actor
shot
who
is
plays
perfectly.
Bruce Lee is really good.
He's hilarious. He's
Yes,
great.
yes.
It's absolutely wonderful. I just love this. It's fun.
And then
People
the
are
scene
too
ends going back to Cliff
uptight.
working on the house on the antenna. He just kind of looks at it and goes, whatever. Yeah.
He
He just,
goes,
whatever. Yeah.
He gives that shrug like,
Yeah.
I get it.
Whatever. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't whatever. It was more like, I deserve that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what he's, he gets
But
it.
I kind of disagree a little bit here with the Bruce Lee thing. I do like the scene, don't get me wrong, but I do understand the frustration with the family because it does paint Bruce Lee as not as great as Bruce Lee thinks he is, type of deal, and makes him look like cartoonish and silly. And we are also talking about a man who dies 3 years later.
Well, okay.
But I'm just saying, I understand why people are frustrated with it. I like the scene overall.
Quentin addressed this whole thing in interviews. He said if Bruce Lee's daughter wants to be upset with it, that's perfectly fine. Everybody else just needs to stop.
Would he say the same thing about Sharon Tate's sister? If Sharon Tate's sister didn't like what they did with the movie?
Yeah, probably wouldn't have done the movie.
This movie originally was released on the 50th anniversary of her murder, which pissed her sister off. She made it known on one of the local or probably national TV shows. Tarantino called her, discussed this with her, and pushed back the premiere date a couple weeks. She really appreciated that, and it kind of changed her impression of the movie and of Quentin Tarantino himself. I'm not saying she liked the movie 100%, but it was big of Tarantino to do that.
Quentin was addressing everybody else that was getting all butthurt over the portrayal of Bruce Lee. And he was not saying that the family couldn't have been upset over the portrayal. He says that they did. He goes, it's everybody else. People are way too sensitive. If you're not Bruce Lee's family, I mean, really?
Well, then you got to be careful with how you say that, because any of your heroes, let's say John Lennon, or let's say just down the road, they make a biopic on one of these directors that we've done, and they make fun of them. And then you're like, well, they're fair game. Because there's people who look up to Bruce Lee. They think of him as the greatest martial arts guy in the history of martial arts. There's a high opinion of him. And then when somebody takes a shot at Bruce Lee, there are going to be people who have the right to say, you know what, I don't like that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I'm okay with what Quentin Tarantino did here. But I understand why people get frustrated when their heroes are taken down a peg and they're not around to defend themselves.
Fair enough. I can't argue with that.
One thing, though, if we just rewind just a little bit, when Eric, you were talking about how Cliff's going up and he gets all the tools out of Rick's tool shed, we do get the Chekhov's gun moment where all of a sudden, as Cliff is walking out of the shed with all the tools, the camera just slowly pans down just a little bit and you see the flamethrower. And then it goes. It's just a little hint, a little nod that, okay, Rick has the flamethrower that he used in the 14 Fists of McCluskey in his tool shed.
It works.
It's just one of those things that Quentin, he loves to do. Things will always come back. And
little foreshadowing.
Chekhov's gun is a thing in most screenwriting and playwriting where if you don't show the gun over the mantle, unless the gun's going to be used later on. It's just a quick nod. Kurt Russell's great in this, where he plays the gaffer who's setting everybody up, and his exasperation with Cliff and everything is just...
He is phenomenal. In the 5 minutes he's on site. He's great.
Yeah.
But he also narrates some of the...
He's also the narrator.
Yeah. In all this, when he's up on the roof, we get to see that Charles Manson shows up. He's looking for the previous owners where Polanski and Tate right now live.
Driving his little Twinkie mobile.
Yeah, I was trying to make out what that was.
Twinkies.
Okay,
he's looking for Terry Melcher.
Right. And me and Ted were discussing this, and Ted had mentioned to me that in real life, they were actually renting that house from them.
It was rental.
Yeah. But in the movie, it made it sound like that they own the house.
Actually, if you remember, I'll point out a scene here. When Cliff and Rick pull up to the house and they first see Tate and Polanski leaving, after they leave, that's when he's talking about buying Hollywood real estate. He's
they're leasing it from Terry Melcher.
You always want to buy real estate.
The reason why I said that was because they said that he now doesn't live here anymore.
It was Terry Melcher and his girlfriend, Candace Bergen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The only thing I have a problem with this scene at all is the fact that they tell Charles Manson that they don't live there anymore. But for whatever reason, at the end of this movie, he sends them over to kill the owners.
I did some research into that, and this little interaction did happen where Charlie comes looking for Terry Melcher. Whether or not he was going to kill him that day, is lost to history now, but he was told that they don't live there. As Charlie is getting everybody prepared for what ends up happening, he said, just go back to Terry's house and kill everybody there and make it look witchy. They were trying to make it look like a copycat murder that Bobby Beausoleil had committed of a LSD dealer, and Bobby Beausoleil was in prison already. But this goes into much later stuff into the movie.
Because
he didn't care.
Then it doesn't sound like a revenge plot.
There's a lot of people who have written a lot of books and made a lot of money trying to hypothesize as to what Charlie Manson was in his head.
So after we see this interaction, we go back on the Lancer TV show. I believe it's a pilot.
I think you're right.
So he gets to play the baddie here. Again, Rick gets to play the baddie. And he gets to meet Trudy, who's an 8-year-old actress. And she's basically the most grown-up 8-year-old actress you're ever going to meet.
She's 8 going on 40.
And she wants to basically be known by her character's name while she's on set, because she has to be in character at all times.
She's got to be method.
She's going method at 8. That is so hilarious. And then she's reading a book about Walt Disney, describing Disney as genius. I think was,
a once in a 50 or 100 year genius.
He asked permission if he could sit next to her to read like she's reading. And he sits down, and of course he's making all these coughing noises, and he's spitting, and it's kind of disgusting her a little bit, and he's apologizing. He's reading a book about a guy who tames horses, who is the best at what he does, but then gets hurt and then isn't able to do his job well anymore. And he starts to relate to that, and he starts to cry, and Trudy comes over and tries to tell him, it's okay, it's all right. I think she knows what's going on, because Rick is a crier. He's upset about where he's at in his life. He calls her Pumpkin Puss.
Oh, and she hates it.
I don't like people giving me nicknames like that, because you're upset. We'll talk about that later.
Later.
Julia Butters, who's also in a TV show called American Housewife, plays like the youngest daughter, I believe, in that show.
Yeah, she did.
She's great here. I mean, because she is roughly around that age. And she actually does a really good job here. It's a nice interaction. And then after that, he gets to meet James Stacy, who's the lead here. And they go back and forth about their roles. And James says that he was up for that World War II movie that we talked about earlier in the podcast, and that he just missed that chance to be in that movie. And then he asked Rick if he really had a chance to be in The Great Escape. And Rick is upset, because he's saying, no, I never got an opportunity to even go for that role. That was Steve McQueen's role. But they show kind of like a what if he was in that film. It was very Forrest Gump looking. It didn't look right.
It's my least favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, this one doesn't really flow that well. James,
it just seems like filler, doesn't it?
This movie doesn't need filler because it's 2 hours and 40 minutes long.
And it's unfortunate, too, because Timothy Olyphant is really good. I like him a lot.
Oh, yeah, I like him in general. This doesn't work as well as him and Trudy worked. It just doesn't seem to have that same effect.
And I've also kind of tipped my hand. I love Steve McQueen. So having DiCaprio replace Steve McQueen in The Great Escape, it doesn't work at all. And it's not quite up to snuff, like you said. It's the Forrest Gump telling Lyndon Johnson that he was shot into buttocks.
Exactly. Exactly.
Sort of bad. It's like, yeah, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah, it could be left out. There's just no reason to even have it in there. It makes you actually agree that he's not good enough to be in The Great Escape.
Right.
Maybe that's what Quentin was trying to do.
Maybe. The hero of this section, though, is the little girl. She's just awesome. It's such a great interaction. And I mean, I understand that Rick is constantly smoking. He keeps hacking up a lung continually. It's like, wow, man, dude.
We're introduced at the beginning of the movie of him having problems speaking and talking straight.
Yeah, he has a stutter. He's kind of like Mel Tillis, the singer. He stutters when he's not giving lines. That happens to some actors.
Sure.
When they're doing their lines, they don't stutter. But when they're just talking normal, some of them do stutter. It's kind of weird. It's like Mel Tillis, like I said. He had a horrible stutter.
But he was stuttering in Cannonball Run.
Him
and Terry Bradshaw.
Not when he sings, though.
Right, not when he sings. He sings perfectly. This section leads us into another one of my favorite parts of this movie, and it's one of the sections that leaves me... I love this section because it's so honest, but it also leaves me kind of melancholy. We follow Sharon Tate. On a regular day, she's going out shopping. So she's going to downtown Los Angeles. So she picks up a hitchhiker and she makes friends with the hitchhiker. That is something that Quentin continually presses throughout the movie, is the normalcy of picking up a hitchhiker, which in the 60s was a thing. It was normal. They go their separate ways after Sharon parks, and Sharon's just walking around doing her thing. She's there to pick up a first edition book for Roman, and she notices on one of the marquees.
The movie marquee.
The movie marquee.
On the movie marquee.
We've waited 40 some odd episodes to say it.
Right? So she sees on the movie marquee, one of her movies is playing. It brings a smile to her face. But then she lets it go and she goes and does her shopping. But then as she's coming back around, she stops by the same theater and she asks to buy a ticket to start with. She looks at the ticket seller and she goes, "What if I'm in the movie?" They act like they don't know her. The lady does bring up the fact that she was in Valley of the Dolls, but they don't seem starstruck by her. I find that vaguely amusing. And they have her pose in front of the poster for the movie, and they let her in. She sits down in the movie theater and she puts her glasses on and she's watching the movie and she starts acting out the scene, kind of the scene with the movie, but it's the way how Sharon is so touched and makes her so happy that the people react the way that they should to what she's doing on screen. And where Quentin did with The Great Escape and cut DiCaprio in there, he didn't cut this movie. And that is actually Sharon Tate. So Margot Robbie's watching Sharon Tate on screen. They're doing the fight sequence. She's like shadowing what she's doing on screen. And it's just wonderful.
She just shines in the way that she portrays it. You're happy with her. As you said, she picks up the hitchhiker, and I know it's one of those things that's what people did back then, but it also showed what a good heart it seemed that Sharon Tate seemed to have. How appreciative she looks about being a movie star. Interesting thing about The Wrecking Crew, this movie that she's watching, the dates is like within a week of when the actual film was released. That kind of fits the timeline, which is kind of cool in a way. Wrecking Crew was a series. I guess they had 4 films that they had done, and Dean Martin was supposed to be on for a 5th film, but because of Sharon Tate dying, he said that he would not do it. So they actually scraped the next movie because Dean Martin backed out because of what happened to Sharon Tate. I do wish she would wash her feet before she actually went into the theater, or maybe that's a 60 thing. I don't know.
Sharon's sister said this to Quentin because she did spend a lot of time with Quentin on the set. I guess Sharon hated wearing shoes. What she would do to trick people would be to put rubber band so it looked like she had thong sandals on so she wouldn't have to wear any sort of shoes. I guess she just hated them. It would have been natural that she would have had dirty bottoms of feet, but we also get the quintessential Quentin shot of course, of the feet. When he was doing the press for the movie, they asked Quentin if he had ever done this, and Quentin said he's done it for every one of his movies. He slips in and watches the movie with an audience and then slips out. Brad Pitt has said that he's done it a couple of times for his movies.
I can understand why they probably didn't recognize her. Her career was just starting. The posters show her wearing glasses. So
she had red hair too.
And she had red hair in the movie. The fact that she's trying to get out of paying 75 cents because she's in the movie, I mean, granted, 75 cents is.
I think she just wanted to say that she was in the movie.
In the movie. She
was caught up in the moment of seeing her name on the marquee. It's not that she didn't want to pay it. It was just more.
Heck, I would have paid more just because my name was on the marquee. I'd be like, here's some more money because the box office needs to go up. Needs the numbers to go up.
Right.
What's your thoughts, Eric?
I love this scene too. I love the outfit she's wearing. The outfits throughout this movie. The time is perfect. I'm kind of into those boots and those skirts, so it's a good
boots.
look. Little Nancy Sinatra look, man. You know, I'm hip. I like the outfits. I like her personality. Like you said, she's picking up the hitchhiker. She didn't just drop the hitchhiker off and say, "Hey, have a good day." She gave her a hug like she was like her best friend. It emphasized her just lovable personality of people. I liked the scene where she's taking the photo with the manager, and they're like, No, move over to the poster so we know who you are. some people be like, hey, F you, take the photo. But no, she's good. And the reactions from the crowds, she's digging it. She really is. It's a great scene. I really enjoy it.
It would have been interesting if they would have had one of the Manson girls be one of the hitchhikers.
There's a very good possibility that it was someone in the Manson family. You never know.
We're kind of playing a film where all these characters are kind of entwined with each other.
They're in each other's orbit. At the center of it is Hollywood. I mean, that's why it's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
So they're filming the pilot. The first scene that we get to see is Rick's out there and he's playing the baddie, and a gunslinger has come into town, and he basically has a fight with a businessman. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but he shoots him by shooting behind his back. That character was James Stacey that we talked about earlier. So he goes back in, and Rick's character is waiting for him, and they've worked together before, and they've killed people before, and they sit down and have a drink. We find out that James's character is there to maybe go up against Rick, but he's looking for the highest bidder at this particular time. But we get to find out that Rick is not a nice guy. I guess he has hurt this girl who plays a fiddle. And this is where we get to see Rick giving out his lines. He's doing a good job, but then all of a sudden he starts having trouble remembering his lines. He's getting frustrated. The first time he just moves forward. The second time he just wants to cut it. And he's like, let's start over. And everybody's getting frustrated with him, even to the point where James Stacey you could see the look on his face is like, seriously, I have to work with this guy. He gets his crap together and finishes out the scene, but then he goes to his trailer and just throws stuff, gets mad at himself, threatens to kill himself if he doesn't get himself straightened out. And he even says, why am I drinking whiskey sours? He's just so frustrated and he's so upset with himself. He gets himself composed and he comes out for another scene. When they're doing these scenes, I forget that we're in a different movie. I feel like we're on Lancer. And this was my favorite part of the movie here is these scenes, because I feel like I get two movies I'm watching here. But he comes back and he has this performance where he has Trudy's character and he's holding her hostage, wanting $50,000, talking to the other brother of James Stacey's character, which is played by Luke Perry in his final performance. Yeah. They're arguing about getting the money, and then he takes the child and just throws it to the ground. Acting within acting is something else. When you're an actor playing an actor who's acting in a film, I always think that might be difficult to do. I've seen people do it and not do it well. DiCaprio just nails this. This is so good. I almost wanted it to be a real TV show. He goes, I'm sorry I threw you. Are you okay? He's like, oh, I got the pads on and stuff like that. I throw myself on the floor all the time.
Right.
And the fact that the director comes to him and says he does a great job. Before, Rick was a lot of pushback about changing his image. And so people wouldn't be able to see who he is. And he's like, I don't want you to see you. I want them to see the character. And I think that's been a problem maybe of Rick's all this time, is the fact that he wants people to see him. And I agree. So he's more of a movie star than an actor. And I think here is his acting moment. Finally, he becomes an actor. And he does it extremely well. And Trudy goes up to him and tells him how great of a job he did. And he's almost getting ready to cry again because everybody's so impressed with his acting job. He really wasn't an actor until that moment. Before that, he was just a TV movie star who was just one-dimensional. And that was because he limited himself to be that.
This shows that DiCaprio is a tour de force. This is brilliant. When Quentin shoots a movie, there's not a lot of improvisation done. DiCaprio told him, let me do this my way. And Quentin gave him the latitude. They shot it two different ways. And Quentin was so blown away by what DiCaprio did in the trailer. It was all improvised. DiCaprio even said, he goes, I may or may not have had these sort of discussions with myself in the trailer. Comes off naturally.
Forgetting the lines was part of that. That wasn't in the script, him forgetting the lines. That was all DiCaprio as well.
Right. It's wonderful. And when he comes back after coming out of the trailer to shoot that scene with the little girl in his arms with Luke Perry's character, DiCaprio does a good job, but Rick Dalton does a good job. So you have that meta, that meta thing going on. It's brilliant. DiCaprio's in another stratosphere.
But as the character of Rick Dalton, this solidifies him as, like you guys mentioned, an actor. He has made that step up to something where before he was kind of just doing schlock and reading lines and memorizing lines. The fact that he actually improvised these lines and the director loved it, and the little girl said, "You're the best actor I've ever worked with." And of course, he cries again. It just solidifies him as the next notch, where now other people besides Cliff are building up his confidence.
You would think that if he had a better manager after this performance, that he doesn't have to go do spaghetti westerns, that they can use this performance, getting him different roles within Hollywood. So seeing him going to the spaghetti westerns later on is a little disappointing, even though I have nothing against spaghetti westerns. We talked about Clint Eastwood earlier and how great his spaghetti westerns were. There should have been a launching point of him being an actor, but what happens? He goes backwards. He goes back to being the movie star and not an actor, and takes those jobs over in Europe.
But does he, though? I don't know, because then we get a brief shot of Al Pacino here where he's talking to the Italian director, and he's like, "I'm seeing on the screen your Nebraska Jim." To a certain extent, yeah, you're right. But this really, though, it sets him up to be able to do these movies. And it's what he's wanted to do, is be a movie star, not a TV guest spot person. He's been trying to get pilots all the time, and he just keeps getting these guest spot roles. This sets him back up into the movies. So even though they might be the spaghetti westerns, it's still, they're still getting him into the movies.
Only temporary.
It's like everything in Hollywood, especially back in that time, where I don't know necessarily that Rick Dalton's career went down with everything. After we get this brilliant performance by DiCaprio, it leads us into the parallel story that's going on. We go back to Cliff, who is having his own adventure. He's driving Rick's car, and he runs into the same Manson girl, except this time he can pick her up hitchhiking. And so he picks her up. She's describing where they're going. He immediately picks up that it's out to the Spahn Ranch. And he kind of raises his eyebrows at that, and he tells her he knows where he's going. He worked as a stuntman on shows that were filmed out there. So she offers him a blowjob while they're driving the car. And
that's pretty blunt.
Well, there's really no other way to put it. She just comes out and asks him. And so he asks her to prove how old she is. And he goes, "You can't." Because Cliff's whole thing is that he's never going to go back to prison because he spent some time, I guess, in Houston on a chain gang. He's not going to go to jail for having relations with an underage girl. And so she's kind of bummed out about this whole prospect, and they end up going to Spahn Ranch. Now, the way this is shot, pulling up to Spahn Ranch, Quentin wanted it to feel like pulling up to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house. If you look at it that way, you really get that vibe. They pull up, and you start to see the Manson family members start coming out, and they're all kind of checking him out to see if he's a potential family member. They're all kind of skeptical of him, but up on the hill, there's the house, and we keep shooting from the inside of there, and Cliff brings it up as to whether George Spahn lives there. They keep trying to keep him from going into this house. And Cliff is pretty streetwise, so he knows that they're trying to keep him out. And they introduce him to all of the different family members. Of course, they end up introducing him to Tex. Tex being Tex Watson. He kind of has this back and forth with Tex about where in Texas were you from and all of this. And that's where he found out that Cliff was in jail. Cliff defies the family members and goes up to the house, and we're introduced to Squeaky Fromme, who has taken over Mr. Spahn's house, and she refuses to let him in. She's creepy. Everything here is creepy. He tells her that he's going to come in, and she's just disgusted that he's even thinking about coming in. And she tells him that George is blind, and he walks into the house, and he goes into the back bedroom, and he's checking everything out, trying to see how everything's set up. And he tries to have a conversation with George Spahn, and he shakes him awake. And George Spahn first thinks he's John Wilkes Booth, And George Spahn is played by the great Bruce Dern. He's just out of it. He's an old man. He's blind. And it's obvious to Cliff that they're taking advantage of him. And that really ticks Cliff off. And Cliff realizes then that he can't get anywhere with George, and he's not going to be satisfied by what's happening here. And so he leaves George and goes back out of the house, and all of the family members that had been lined up are gone. But one of the male family members has stuck a knife in the tire and deflated his tire. And this really pisses Cliff off because it's not his car. He finds the guy that does it. And the guy, he gets mouthy with him, and we see how fast Cliff can turn. And he beats the living hell out of this Manson family member and forces him to fix the tire. But in the meantime, one of the head family members sends off for Tex, and we see Tex trying to come back from taking people on a tour of the Spahn Ranch in the valley. As Tex pulls up, we see Cliff leaving. It really establishes how creepy this whole scene with the Manson family is and how weird they all are. Something not right is going on here. As Cliff's walking up to the house, on the side you can see the dune buggies. That's something that the family actually did on Spahn Ranch, is they built their own dune buggies. So I thought that was kind of interesting. That's what the Manson family did. They lived at Spahn Ranch. It was where TV westerns were shot, and they lived in the old sets. And all of the members are creepy and weird. That's how they were. Scary weird, though. Not weirdos like in a fun weirdo kind of way. They were scary weirdos.
We're talking about the character of Pussycat, who's played by Margaret Qualley. I guess she's the daughter of Andy McDowell.
I can see that.
Makes sense. I can see that.
When she's on the bench or when she's walking across the street and she's making eye contact with Brad Pitt's character, she's very alluring. And this is another thing where I just believe Cliff was an accident with his wife because she offers him the blowjob. He refuses. She's under 18. He could easily get away with it. I know he makes an excuse that doesn't want to go to jail for it. But to be honest, he probably would have easily got away with it if he just wanted to. And you're right, Ted. The tension gets high when you get to the ranch. You wonder what's going to happen. You feel like this isn't going to end well. You're by yourself. You know, all these people. And I didn't know much about the history of the ranch before I watched the movie. I'm worried about the George character. Is George dead? Is he decomposing in the bedroom? Is that why they won't let him in? I'm thinking all these worst case scenarios. This is not going to end well for you. You know, you're going to die. So there's a lot of tension being built up. And it's really interesting to see how Dakota Fanning has come through, you know, all these years. You know, she plays like she's in charge when Charles is gone.
She plays Squeaky from.
I guess technically the Squeaky came from George.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard something that because of the sounds that she makes.
That was a real thing, too. One of the reasons that the family was able to stay on Spahn Ranch is because George Spahn in real life liked Squeaky Fromme. They kind of gave Squeaky to George Spahn to facilitate having no rent. It was a very weird situation. In real life.
And she even says, like, I fucked his brains out, so he's probably pretty tired right now. She made sure that Cliff knew that before visiting. And then you go in, and he's, like, laying out there, and you're thinking, yeah, he's dead. But this place is disgusting. I mean, there's nothing's being washed. There's a rat or a mouse that's been caught, but it's like
it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I loved the allegory that he makes with the rat that's caught in the trap and is dying. Everything there is all meaningful.
And I'm not the biggest fan of doing the flashback, but I almost kind of wish there was a flashback of George and Cliff back on the set where they actually know each other. Yeah, George has no clue who Cliff
like
is.
I said, he thinks he's John Wilkes Booth.
He's not very nice to him, and he doesn't know who Rick is. He doesn't even know the show. He just seems totally out of it, like he's been drugged or something. But he's probably just senile and 80 years old. You know, I think at the time he was 80 years old. In real life, I think he lives another 5 more years. I don't know if any of them stay on the ranch much longer after the Manson murders actually happen. I actually almost wished more happened, but I guess you don't have to have it because the build-up itself, and then the fact that he goes and just knocks out that guy that went ahead and put a knife in his tire. Pussycat turns on him at the end. She goes from somebody who just adores him. She yells, "George is not blind. You're the blind one." Ah! And then everybody's like,
crazy.
All of a sudden she turned crazy. Outside of the ranch, she's this normal girl.
Going into this movie, I knew if Sharon Tate was going to be a part of it and that Manson was going to be a part of it. When I saw the movie and how this all started to go, I didn't think Cliff was walking out of there.
I didn't think so either.
I thought Tex was going to kill him.
Yeah.
And ironically enough, like 2 years later, when they're into the heart of the trial, I think it might have been Bobby Beausoleil or it might have been Tex or the other crazy guy that actually gets his butt kicked. That was a real life person too. Took the cops back out to the Spawn Ranch and they dug up a guy who was an old stuntman who worked on the ranch.
Yeah, I read that.
One of those weird things. Of course, Quentin probably would have known. Just adds to the weirdness of the whole thing.
And then, like you said, we get to meet Tex. Of course, I guess they make money on the side taking people on these horse trails.
Yeah, Tex was from Texas.
Yes, that's why he got the nickname Tex.
Yeah.
Again, I think that was given to him by George as well.
Quentin goes out of his way to make all of these people look super creepier than they were in real life. Tex did not look like that. He actually looked pretty normal, which I don't know if is scarier or what. He didn't look total crazy ass like what he's played here.
It's a scene that just lives on. I mean, just the building and the tension and just the coolness of Brad Pitt's character is just seen throughout this scene. You really think he's going to die. You really think Tex is going to kill him or someone's just going to stab him or something. He's done. And he just keeps going forward and forward. Nothing phases him. And I love the tire scene when he's leaving. I love that scene. It's just so out there.
That guy got the tire changed pretty quickly, though. I gotta give him
did.
That was fast.
He got the shit beat out of
Yeah.
him. Cliff worked him over real well.
Hell, I thought he was going to take the tire iron and go after Cliff with it. When he flips it and kind of...
I thought so too, but I think he realized that he was way outmatched.
Way over his head, yeah.
The only person that could have conceivably have taken Cliff was Tex.
Probably. So as you see the Cadillac leaving the ranch, now we're back to Rick's house to watch the FBI TV series that he is making a guest appearance in. So Rick and Cliff are at the house. They're watching the FBI series. They're drinking. They're having their cigarettes. Rick is very, very happy with his performance. As his performance is being aired on television, his manager for his movies, and now Marvin sees it, calls up the director in Italy and says, "Hey, you need to watch this. This is your next actor in your movies."
Nebraska Jim
to kick it off. Yeah. So he sees that. From there on, we see the history of what's now is happening. We see the flight back after. He is there with Cliff for 6 months, filming 4 movies. He is married. He's put on 15 pounds. He's grown his hair out. He's grown his sideburns out. And he has definitely changed his style. Cliff has changed his style as well. And if I remember right, in one of those movies, Cliff did act as a stunt double on the car scene when he was going over the bridge.
The spaghetti spy movie.
Yes. The James Bond knockoff, yes. So he's along for the ride. Rick's in first class and Cliff's down there in coach enjoying his bottomless drink. And he still seems content in coach. You gotta love him. And then they flash back to a scene where they're in Spain where he is having that hard conversation with Cliff, letting him know pretty much what he's saying is, "I'm married. I've spent way too much money. I just can't afford you." And I love how that front door keeps opening like every 9 seconds and the light just keeps blinding him just to irritate him. Kind of a little bit of an homage there. After that, they get back into the airport and back into the house.
One of the movies that Rick stars in here was directed by Antonio Margheriti. The name that Eli Roth gives at the end of Inglourious Basterds to get into the German movie premiere.
Right. It's all full circle.
Antonio Margheriti.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite scenes from Inglourious Basterds.
You gotta love it, man. You gotta love it.
And you have to love the racist book title that the one movie was based off of. The title of the book was "The Only Good Indian is a Dead Indian."
Dead Indian, yes, yeah, right.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah,
man.
I forgot about that.
And he stars with Telly Savalas in the
Right.
one movie. It breaks the tension from what we just saw with the Manson family.
It does.
And
now you're seeing a whole new side of Rick. I don't want to say the new and improved Rick, but a new, more cosmopolitan Rick who is now kind of changed. He's not the Sinatra style anymore. He's changed with the times. What they say is like the Neil Diamond look.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, he's got that look now.
We get the narrator that says that they're just going to have a good old-fashioned drunk. At this point in the movie, we know we're coming towards the end.
With still 40-some-odd minutes to go in the movie, too, which is the greatest part, right.
But we know what we're building up to. As that section ends, we go to the actual day of the murders. I love the way that Quentin uses the narrator here, where he sets it up where we get the establishing shot that now Sharon is 9 months pregnant, while Roman is finishing up filming a movie in London. Jay Sebring is staying with him, but also one of Roman's old friends, Friet Zykowski, is staying at the house, and he's actually dating Abigail Folger, who was of the Folger Coffee empire. Sharon is very pregnant, and it's weighing on her, but they go out for dinner, and they go to the El Coyote Mexican restaurant, which the day of the murders is actually where the four of them were last seen. But then we get Rick and Cliff are in another restaurant, and they're just getting absolutely shit-faced. Shit-faced to the point where Cliff can't drive, so they end up taking a cab back to Rick's house, and we get the Sharon is very uncomfortable because it's so hot. She just wants to go back home. So they go back to Cielo Drive as well. And because Rick and Cliff, this is the end, quote-unquote, end of their professional relationship, whether it's the end of their friendship remains to be seen. But we bring back something from before where we see Cliff has bought a cigarette dipped in acid. And this is where he decides that he's going to take his dog for a walk and he's going to smoke the cigarette. And Rick's making frozen margaritas. So he takes the dog for a walk, and as he's walking down Cielo Drive, we see this old Ford Clips.
It's a beat-up car.
It's a shit wagon.
Yeah.
Ironically enough, whoever was doing the stuff for this movie, that is the car.
Really?
That's the car. How they found it, I have no idea, but that is the car. Well, as Rick explains it, it's a raging asshole of a car. They're making all this noise outside, and that pisses Rick off, and Rick's drunk, so he takes his pitcher of frozen margaritas and goes out and yells at Tex. And in the car is Tex, Linda Kasabian, Leslie Van Houten, and Susan Atkins. He yells at him and tells him to get the hell off of his street. He calls them a bunch of fucking hippies. And this is where we go back into the car, and it's established that Tex is in charge, and Charlie has told them to kill the people at Cielo Drive, that it doesn't matter. He wants them to do something witchy, supposedly is what Charlie said in real life. In the meantime, Leslie Van Houten realizes that was Rick Dalton and comes up with something that will be established, a criminal defense that came up in the 80s, that everybody had seen somebody be killed on TV, that this was going to be a defense for them killing somebody. So they decide they're going to kill Rick Dalton. They go back up, and Linda Kasabian, who's played by Maya Hawke, which is Ethan Hawke's daughter, who stars in Stranger Things, she runs back down to the car as Linda Kasabian did in real life, except here in the movie, she takes off in the car and leaves Tex and the other two, just leaves them out there. They're still going to kill everybody, but they're going to hitchhike back home. And so they go back up the hill, and they break into Rick Dalton's house. In the meantime, Cliff is back with his dog, and he's trying to feed his dog. He's high as a kite. And he tastes the dog food that Eric had mentioned before. He licks it, and he looks at the dog, and he's like, eh. And we don't know where Rick is. When they break open through the door, he doesn't know at first if they're real or if they're a figment of his trip. It's played off in an action comedic kind of way, where all of a sudden Cliff realizes that he knows these three people who are in the house now. He looks at Tex, he goes, "First, you're for real, right?" This is where we get the famous line that Tex says, I'm the devil, and I'm here to do the devil's business. And Cliff has the best line in the entire movie. No, it was something dumber than that. He's trying to remember his name. He goes, "You rode a horsey." But Tex comes forward and Cliff disarms him. He sicks the dog on Tex. And that is where the whole fight begins. And the dog just tears Tex apart. And the one girl starts to scream, and she screams for the rest of this entire scene. And Cliff, he takes the one and he beats her all over the living room of the house and caves her skull in on the mantle. So the other girl, she had come after Tex, and Tex threw one of those big cans of dog food and just hits her right in the nose and knocks her out. But she wakes up, she starts screaming again and runs outside to the pool. Rick is in the pool and he's listening to the Ballad of Snoopy versus the Red Baron on his headphones. And she ends up in the pool, scares the crap out of Rick. Rick doesn't know what the hell's going on anywhere. And she starts to fire the gun in the air. And Rick gets himself out of the pool and goes to his tool shed. And Rick comes back out with a flamethrower. And like I said before, the Chekhov's gun rule, Rick takes the flamethrower and turns the lady into a toasted marshmallow. So we have the 3 dead Manson family members, and Cliff has been stabbed in the side of the leg, and we see the cops are called. You watch them bring out the weapons and the evidence bags and stuff, and Rick is worried about Cliff and wants to go to the hospital with him, and Cliff was like, "No, don't." He goes, "Come in the morning and bring bagels." He goes, "I'll be fine." Rick is standing there in the middle of Cielo Drive. He can't believe what's happened. And Jay Sebring comes down to the gate. He asks Rick what happened, and Rick gives a description of what happened. And Jay Sebring goes, "You're Rick Dalton." And they make small talk back and forth. All this time, we've been wondering, how big was Rick? And we know that Tex had his own Bounty Law lunchbox. And Jay Sebring establishes, too, that Rick was very famous. And they say that even that he has joked with Sharon about Rick. And so both Sharon and Jay know him. And over the intercom, Sharon asks them to come up to have a drink. We see them embrace in the driveway, and the movie comes to an end. With very fitting, it says, comes up with "Once Upon a Time," and then ... in Hollywood. And the movie's over.
I don't think I could add anything more, even if I wanted to.
One, I don't understand, first of all, why they're going to go their separate ways. They're friends. I mean, yeah, he can't pay him anymore, but why even start there? You like to see the justice is coming towards the Manson killers for what they ended up doing. I mean, this is kind of the way we wished everything would have panned out. It didn't pan out this way. And I mean, it's fun to see her getting bashed in the face with the telephone. It's fun to, burn the other one up with a flamethrower after the dog basically tore her to shreds. The first time I watched this scene, though, before the Manson family got what was coming to them, I was nervous and had anxiety because I was so worried that they were actually going to show the true ending of what happened to Sharon Tate and her friends. I was scared beyond belief. I'm so happy that it ended this way, but at the end of this movie, I didn't feel relief because at the end of the day, Sharon Tate, her baby, and her friends, they died. And it kind of left me feeling sad. I know that's not the intention of the filmmaker here with Quentin Tarantino. The second time around I watched it, it was a little bit better because I didn't have that same anxiety. I didn't have those same emotions that I had the second time around. So it improved my feelings of the movie when I watched it the second time. But that first time it was rough because emotionally I was spent.
I will say I agree with you here. The first time I saw the movie, I was wondering as well how we were going to approach this. The reason that I got so worried was because of the drastic tone change that happened when Cliff goes to the ranch. That tone change was so pronounced to me that I was worried what Quentin was going to do here.
That cigarette laced with acid, though, that was what scared me because that compromises Cliff's character. Cliff is a badass. I mean, that's his face.
He should be the guy to protect him, yeah.
Yeah, but now he's compromised. Now you're even worried even more what's going to happen. And we know Tarantino's history of bloodbaths.
Exactly.
We see it in Pulp Fiction. We see it in Kill Bill.
If you want to really know what went through my mind, is I didn't want to see the ending of Kill Bill 1. I didn't want the Sharon Tate murder to turn
That's
into
how
that.
I was in the theater as well. I'm like, oh man, don't go this route. The one difference is, versus a lot of the older Tarantino flicks, you kind of had a little bit of a synopsis before you even went to the theater on how the movie was going to end because of our good friend the internet.
I knew that Sharon Tate was involved. I didn't know it was a fictional ending.
So you really went into this movie not knowing anything about it. You knew the name, but none of the specifics at all.
I knew that Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt's characters were fictional, but everything else, to my understanding, was
you probably saw
real.
It how we reacted in the theater.
Yeah,
slightly.
Going into the movie, I knew enough, but Quentin had really kept a lid on the end of this movie. Like, there was no information. And when this debuted at Cannes, he basically made everybody sign an NDA that they would not release the end of this movie. He wanted the moviegoers to experience it for the first time, and he basically begged the critics and everybody, if you're going to write it, please don't write about the end of the movie. Everybody knew that this was going to be Manson and Tate and then these two fictional characters, but nobody knew how this movie was going to end. I avoided anybody talking about how the movie ended, and I didn't know. I know Quentin based off of my previous movie-going experiences, and I was worried. I'll be perfectly honest. The way, Ken, you said that you were spent, it made me cry a little bit, because knowing and read enough about what exactly happened inside the Sharon Tate house, it's beyond a horror movie what those four people had happened to them.
I think Eric's good at separating himself from fiction, a work of art here of this movie, to real life events. But for me, it was very hard to do.
It doesn't change my wishing that that's how it would have happened.
Of course.
But I love the movie. It's just the end is a little melancholy for me. It's like I really wish that's what would have happened. I mean, because I don't want to go into too graphic a detail. This isn't a Manson podcast. There's plenty of them out there that'll describe to you in detail exactly what happened. To put it mildly, it was a horror show. Any worse than you could ever imagine. Every detective that went up to Cielo Drive and saw the Tate house, every single one of them had to go to therapy. It was that bad. The door that they used in the movie, to the door to Cielo Drive house, the Tate house, that is the same door that was on the house. I guess a guy owns it, and it's in some sort of weird-ass museum or something. And they brought the actual door back to wherever they filmed this and put it up.
That's kind of disturbing.
It's weird.
At least it wasn't behind the green door.
Well, the house was leveled in 94.
Cielo Drive?
Yeah, they leveled the house. They built a multi-million-dollar mansion on it that is currently for sale right now. I looked it up. It's for sale for $69 million. They changed the address of it, but they leveled the house. Yeah. Whoever owned the house after the Manson murders stayed in the house for like 18 years and then sold it. It went to a few realtors, investors, and then the last guy leveled it and built this beautiful, it's like 9-room, 18-bathroom, 20-some thousand square feet.
Kind of like where I live.
Kind of like where you live, and it's currently on the market for $70 million.
Whether or not you believe in this sort of thing, the house that you're talking about was featured on an episode of The Ghost Adventures.
Ooh, cool.
Because supposedly the house is haunted.
Trent Reznor lived in it for a few years.
Yes. Wasn't he the last owner?
Last renter, actually, but yeah.
It makes sense.
Why not?
That sounds like Trent.
Some Marilyn Manson filming some stuff there. On this note here, we should probably get into our reviews. Ken, tell us, since it's your virgin time watching this movie in the past week or so, tell us your review.
I like the movie overall. I think it's done really well. I like the attention to detail. I like the scenery. In the other movies we see, I feel like the script is better. The lines are better. There's some quality lines here that make us chuckle here and there, but I think it's a little bit more generic in the way that the lines are.
Do you think Tarantino's writing is better in the other movies?
Yes, I think his writing is better in the other movies. I'm not saying that this is bad. I think it's just a different style of writing. Like you have Reservoir Dogs, that depends on dialogue. First time I watched this, it didn't leave feeling, as Ted would say, happy. This movie did not make me feel good the first time around. But the second time and the third time around watching it, with the anxiety gone, I felt a little bit better about the strong points of this movie. The bromance. Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio work great together. Would love to see them work together again. I buy their bromance here. I like their chemistry together. I love Lancer. I want to see this as a TV show. The acting is great. There's things that I really enjoy of this movie. Initially, I would have given this movie a B minus. I'm going to stick it here with a B. When we talk about Margot Robbie, she's just so beautiful. I would have liked to have seen her done a little bit more dialogue. Eric, you were talking about her outfits. When she goes to the Playboy Mansion, she's a doll and she's dancing, and it's just admiring the beauty of hers. So yes, I give this movie a B.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to keep my review short, sweet, and simple. I kind of tipped my hat when I told you about me seeing it in the theater and then buying it on 4K. This hits all my buttons. I love the cast. I love the scenery, the cinematography, the outfits, the actors, the actresses, the lines. Only thing I don't like about this movie is it's possibly a little bit too long. It could be shaved, but now I want to see the pre-con version that's like 4.5 hours long. Stuff that was cut out of it. So I'd even be okay with the thing being longer. I want to see it. I really do. This is probably a top 15 movie for me. It's just that good of all time.
I agree. The movie's too long. It needs to be shaved by about 40 minutes. It drags at times. It really does drag.
It drags, but it doesn't bug me. That's the thing. Some movies you drag, you're like, come on already. Even the scenes where it drags, it really doesn't bug me. This is by far my favorite Tarantino movie. Hands down. This is a solid A. I probably only reserve A pluses for like my top 10, which we haven't done one yet. So I'm going to go solid A. Ted, it's your baby. End us out.
Quentin calls this his magnum opus. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that it's his magnum opus. He says that it's his favorite movie that he's ever done. And you can tell it comes through. He has a love for this era of movies. This era of movies are the movies that he shows in his 2 movie theaters. It's obvious how much he loves this era. The cast here is perfect. The soundtrack is perfect. There's very little with this movie that is not right. I can't find anything to complain about. If there would be, it would be, and it's a personal thing. It's that I feel a little bit melancholy at the end because that's how I wish everything would have really happened. That does not affect how I feel about the movie. At the end of the day, this is a Quentin Tarantino movie. And Ken, you had brought up something very apropos that this is probably dialogue-wise. This is probably not his best dialogue-driven movie, but it doesn't need to be here. As far as being a written movie about how everything happens in a certain way, this movie is tight as far as storytelling goes. The storytelling here is brilliant. This is the epitome of everything that Quentin has worked to this point to tell a movie and tell a story of how 3 things intertwine and come together that he started to experiment with Pulp Fiction. This is the culmination of all of this. It's amazing how he can weave these 3 separate stories in with each other. I'm not going to say this is Quentin's best movie. For me, that's still Pulp Fiction. And that's a personal thing. And here's the thing with Quentin. Not everybody's favorite Quentin movie is going to be the same. I know people who love Reservoir Dogs, and that's their favorite. I know people who love Django Unchained and love Inglourious Bastards. That's to his credit. This movie, for me, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's a solid A. It falls right there. This is a top 50, top 100 movie for me without even thinking about it. And the thing that puts it completely over the top is the soundtrack and how everything just fits. As far as a movie-going experience, this is probably his best.
All right. Well, we all, for the most part, seem to like it, which is great. All right, Ted, tell us where they can find us on the World Wide Web on Twitter.
Well, we can be found on Twitter at movie_marquee with 2 E's. And we can be found on whatever podcast platform you listen to us on, whether it be Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, you name it, we're probably there, or and Anchor. If you can, leave us a 5-star review. That allows us to be seen by more people.
Ken, you've released some pretty interesting articles lately on Facebook.
Our friend Justin put an article out there about every actor who must return for Quentin Tarantino's 10th and last movie, because Tarantino has said he's only going to do 10. But yeah, definitely join us on Facebook at the Movie Marquee, and just send us a request to join, and we'll approve you, and you'll be part of the discussion.
That's all the time we have for this one. Stay tuned to Twitter and to Facebook for updates on what's next on the Movie Marquee. Thank you, everyone, and have a pleasant tomorrow.
See you at the movies.
See you next time at the Movie Marquee.